Right, Kat, if you tell me when you think you've admitted everybody.
If we just give it one more minute, there's a couple still techie joining.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, if you want to get started.
Okay, thank you very much, Kat. There will undoubtedly be a few more people joining. We actually had over 100 registered, so we'll see. I recognise one or two faces, other faces I don't recognise, but welcome to everybody. I'm Michael Winter, I'm chair of the Devon Local Nature Partnership. I'll make a few introductory comments about the partnership because I suspect one or two of you will know less about it than others, and then we'll go straight into the meat of the meeting. So the Local Nature Partnership brings together partners, as the name suggests, interested in the natural environment, attempting to restore and enhance the natural environment, focusing on nature, climate, people. I mean, that will not surprise you. We have a board, we have working groups, we have a wide range of partners, and we have a number of initiatives. I mean, I could spend ages going through them all, but we have a Devon Invasive Species Initiative, Wild About Devon, which is all about community action, Dark Skies Week, Naturally Healthy Initiative, trying to link in the importance of nature to the importance of people's physical and mental health. One of our key tasks at the moment is helping to prepare for the local nature recovery strategies, which you'll be aware the government is launching a part of the Environment Act, and all localities or local authority areas in the country will be producing these strategies in the coming year or two, which will be part of the planning framework. So will be really important in terms of guiding development and guiding land use to the extent that they can. So we've been doing a lot of work, mainly through the good offices of the Wildlife Trust, in mapping habitats and beginning to prepare the data that is needed for these local nature recovery strategies. So that's one of our key things that we're interested in at the moment. Obviously, and that's why many of you are here today, we have a focus on climate. We work closely with the Devon Carbon Plan. We've taken on the food, farming and sea theme of the Devon Carbon Plan, and started to take forward some of the actions that have come out of that. One of those actions was to conduct a review of farm advice across Devon. It's really important, I think, that we understand what motivates farmers, what incentives might be helpful to them, and critically in this context, what advice is needed. And so we've currently got consultants working on that review of farm advice and how we might up our game in the county in terms of making sure farmers are well equipped for the extraordinary changes that they are currently facing. I don't really need to rehearse that, but you know, if you're a farmer, I look out from my window here and see, you know, acres of rolling mid-Devon countryside, and you know, farmers are hearing words like carbon and biodiversity and nature recovery, food security. They see their fertilizer prices shooting up through the roof, etc., etc. So these are challenging times, and getting nature's place in all that and getting carbon's place in all that is challenging as well. I think it's probably fair to say that we see it as really important to get the carbon / climate emergency and biodiversity emergencies agendas working in tandem. There are tensions, there's no two ways about it. If you wanted to absolutely maximize carbon sequestration through planting trees, you'd plant lots of Douglas fir and Sitka spruce, which would not necessarily be the best trees to plant for biodiversity. So there are compromises to be had in this space, and we'll be hearing about some of that today. And again, that highlights, I think, to me, the need to have some sort of framework in our minds, at least, to plan for these things. You know, how do, you know, if you are a farmer landowner, how do you decide what the best thing to do on your bit of land is, and how does that fit in a wider landscape context with what other farmers and landowners are thinking of doing? And not only farmers and landowners, but citizens as well, who want to play their part in planting trees or other ways of recovering nature. So today, as you know, that the focus is very much on the climate change part of this and on the carbon part of this, and we've got a great range of speakers. I hope there'll be time for discussion as well. There should be. Just a few housekeeping comments before I pass over to Phil Norrey. Because there's too many, I think, for the customary sort of virtual hand raising, I think it's probably best if you put your questions or comments into the chat function. I think most people are familiar with that now. Peter Chamberlain very kindly will pick out some of those for dealing with later. It'll be difficult to have a discussion on those. I think it will have to be a sort of, you know, virtual Q&A session when the time comes, but we'll see. I think I see everyone is on mute at the moment. Everyone's got the hang of this now. Jolly well should have done after 2 years, shouldn't we? So just stay on mute unless you're actually called to give voice to your question when the time comes. I think that's probably all by way of introductions. We are recording this. I suppose I ought to say that because we started recording before some people arrived. I assume no one objects to that. It's just easy for us to make a note and keep a record. Anything, Kat, that I've forgotten to say? No, you're shaking your head, so I've got that right. Okay, so it's a great pleasure to introduce Phil Norrey. I'm sure most of you know Phil, the Chief Executive of Devon County Council, and in this context, importantly, the Chair of Devon Climate Emergency Response Group. I'm going to flatter Phil a minute, if he doesn't mind. We are very, very blessed in Devon to have someone who, as a chief executive, who's been there a long time and knows the county so well. It's not been your old, Phil.
Don't mind.
But B, has got such a profound interest in these kind of issues. You know, not all chief execs and local authorities do. Why should they? People come from all sorts of different backgrounds, but we're very lucky in Devon that Phil, you know, genuinely is passionate about the kind of issues that most of us, I'm sure, on this call are passionate about. So, and has really led and head up the climate change response. So we're really grateful to Phil for coming today. So the floor is yours, Phil.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your introduction. And what I wanted to do in my 15 minutes or so was to set the context, bring you up to speed with where the Devon climate emergency response is at the moment. Some of you will know that better than others, but I think it's worth setting out the progress to date, and then also touching on the interrelationship between climate emergency response and the local nature partnership in Devon. And again, wishing to return the flattery. We're very lucky, I think, with the quality of our local nature partnership, with the leadership through Michael Winter and many others of you play a really important role in the partnership. I think we've got a very active and well-regarded group, and it's really important that we ensure that we have the synergies between the work of the partnership and the climate emergency response absolutely in place. So hopefully today will help us build on what's already a good story. So just to provide a little bit of context, going right back, Devon was, I think, one of the first, if not the first, county to declare climate emergency back in late 2018. And we were very clear from the start that we wanted to set up a structure that had sort of depth and reach. And yes, the climate emergency, yes, we needed to move fast, but we did think it was really important to ensure that we were working with expert support and that we had the kind of the depth, and that we were doing the right things and addressing ourselves to the right questions. So we set up the climate emergency response group initially very much in the sort of classic civil contingencies mode, and we had a strategic group which I chair, which is the emergency response group, and then tactical group and various subgroups working to us, and say we did want to mimic the civil contingency to give that sense of urgency at the start. We very quickly brought on board net zero task force, which was providing that expert support that I referred to earlier to support our work. And it was absolutely critical for us that that was independent. And one of the things I think it's really important to do is to ensure that we're not being constrained by any kind of political approach in this. We wanted to be led by the science, led by the experts, and ensure that we were doing the right thing. So the Net Zero Task Force is genuinely independent. I'm going along to the meeting this afternoon, and they're pretty challenging in terms of what they say to me as a local authority chief executive, particularly around pace. So it's really important that we've had that group advising us. We also thought right at the start, and actually picking up on one of the recommendations in terms of Extinction Rebellion, that we had proper public engagement in this. So we said right at the start that we wanted public accountability, we wanted to test ideas, and we were going to use the vehicle of a citizens' assembly to do that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Really important to do that, because I think the critical thing is we know there are various layers to all of this, don't we? We know that action has to be taken at a national level, it has to be taken at a regional level, at a local level, but ultimately a lot of the determinants around our success are going to be behaviour change and the public accepting and embracing and supporting what we're trying to do. So we thought it was absolutely crucial that we tested out public appetite and public response to various approaches to tackling carbon reduction. So the Citizens' Assembly was always going to be a key part of our carbon plan. So we went through a process of developing an interim plan with the support of the Net Zero Task Force. We then identified in the production of the interim plan a number of sort of wicked issues, critical ones, which we thought were worth testing out in terms of public support, and those were the things that would go to the Citizens' Assembly. Unfortunately, and as you all know, we were trundling along. Well, we were moving along really quickly when the pandemic hit. So we had to adapt our approach to the strictures of the pandemic, which I think we've done pretty well. And last summer we held the Citizens' Assembly starting in June, kicked off by Professor Ian Stewart, who again gave an inspirational start to things, and that the Citizens' Assembly, 80 odd people drawn from representative backgrounds across the county, addressed themselves to a number of, so really kind of knotty issues, particularly around the retrofitting of buildings and how we should approach that, around transport, the extent to which we should move around our county, how we should move, and the most vexed question, the most difficult question of all we had to deal with, parking, which probably won't surprise you, but when it comes down to it, that was the lightning conductor of the discussions, a lot of the discussions in the Citizens' Assembly, and the extent to which we could restrict and use parking as a lever to change public behaviour. And then another very vexed question, which is actually very topical at the moment because of the discussions that are taking place within government, onshore wind and the appetite of the public to support onshore wind energy generation. So those were the three questions that we addressed through the carbon plan, through the Citizens' Assembly. And we've taking the legal advice, if we are to end up with a carbon plan to which organisations can have recourse and has a certain amount of legal validity, we were very much encouraged to go through a proper full consultation plan using the kind of consultation tests that any government policy would have. And that's why our carbon plan won't be finally published until August of 2022, because we're out to consult at the moment on the response to the Citizens' assembly recommendations to the partnership. And again, that takes time, but the general feeling was that it's better to do it properly. We don't want organisations or individuals challenging us for being foot-faulted on process. So we've taken a little bit of time to do that. It's been a really helpful process in itself. It's been led in terms of the construction independently, so we didn't frame the approach that was taken. We went out and procured independent consultants, and it's being independently reviewed by Exeter University as well, who are looking at the effectiveness of citizens' assemblies in supporting behaviour change, particularly around environmental issues. So that's been really, really helpful. And I will name check Patrick Devine-Wright at Exeter University, who many of you will know, of course, is international lead authority on engaging citizenry in terms of the green agenda, and Patrick's advice and support has been absolutely crucial. So in a sense, we've made sure we got the process absolutely right. We've ensured that it's been independently led and independently reviewed. So in terms of any challenge we think we've got a really robust piece of work that isn't just the result of the imagination of local government officers and a few people stuck in a dark room, but it really does have wider validity. So we will end up at the end of the process with a published Devon carbon plan, which will act as an umbrella, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the moment, for the myriad of organisations within the county who have an interest and an enthusiasm for the agenda. It's very important that we do have that framework, because this is a very crowded, busy, confused and ever-changing agenda, and having a framework, having something to which all the partners can have recourse, I think is really important. Critical chapter, as Michael said at the start, this is food, land, sea, and as Michael said, we're really pleased that the Local Nature Partnership is taking the lead on this chapter and in the natural environmental challenge in relation to the carbon plan. And we've got sort of a number of themes in there, but I'll pull out three really broad issues within that chapter. The first of those is ensuring that we can get the maximum carbon storage in the natural environment. And Michael at the start again referred to the potential dilemmas, the potential difficulties in all of that, particularly fraught. One thing I didn't mention at the start, I think that I should have done, was that right from the start, I'm sure Harry will back me up, because Harry was sort of leading the charge. Harry Barton from Devon Wildlife Trust was leading the charge on this right at the beginning. Right at the start, we were very clear that the climate emergency response group should encompass not only carbon reduction, but also biodiversity and nature recovery. And so we were absolutely clear at that point. And this is one of those areas, isn't it, where, as Michael touched on, there are potential tensions. Within this, we want to protect and enhance existing habitats and ecosystems, do our very best to create the corridors and the join up between areas, and understand that we have to focus not only on sort of internal land use, but also on coast and the sea as critical environments. Again, we'll hear about this in the presentations today. Harry will talk about the Nature Recovery Network. Eleanor will talk on coordinated action for trees and carbon, and Matt will talk on the marine environment. So hopefully that section will be really well covered. The next area of focus is reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from farming. So lots of issues there. And again, Michael's touched on the world of agriculture and farming at the moment, and what a very confusing place it must be for farmers, not only as we transition to ELMs and new subsidy arrangements for farms, but also adapting to a very different international environment, even in the last 4 weeks, that has significantly affected the resources to support food production, and also more recently, not more recently, but sort of the impact of new trade agreements post Brexit and how they're going to have an impact. So an incredibly complicated world at the moment of increasing costs, advice coming out of every orifice from lots of organizations, and just a sense, I think, of calm and steadiness required to support agriculture, looking at carbon use of machinery, looking at use of manure, fertilizers, dealing with waste. And really close to my heart, living in an area where there's rather more maize ground, I would like to see the importance of good soil management, that precious resource that underpins everything. I'm very aware of the kind of degradation, not only of the soil, but also the scientific capacity over the past few years in terms of supporting good soil management, and Becky's going to touch, I say, on the crucial role of farming in her presentation. And then the last area is around, it's sort of behaviour change and changing demand, and particularly nutritious demand for nutritious, sustainably produced food. We're not talking about it today, but I know the LNP is sort of very closely engaged in that. It's a really important thing. Again, lots of issues there, cost of living increases, all the difficulties that people are facing in their day-to-day lives, and the way that we can ensure that sustainable food becomes part of people's diet in a way that it certainly hasn't. We've got a lot of natural advantages in Devon because we produce a lot of sustainable food, but we don't always make the connections between that and the people that that need it, and local demand, whether that's through public agencies or from individual consumers. So those are the three kind of critical areas for the local nature partnership in food, land and sea. Just kind of touching on the wider carbon plan before I finish. I am very conscious of the timing, so I will wrap up soon, Kat. The nature is threaded through the wider carbon plan. Of course, it's not just restricted to food, land and sea. Everything has an impact potentially on biodiversity and nature recovery. The shift away from fossil fuels clearly has a role in relation to air quality and pollution in the natural environment. We've got issues around supporting active travel and use of the local environment by people in terms of their health. That has benefits and disbenefits potentially. And a really, really important issue for us is the circular economy, and ensuring that we can use things sustainably, that we can grow and produce them locally, and that we get the maximum economic benefit from doing that. And again, as a historian in a former life, it always amazes me how brilliant our ancestors were in terms of the circular economy, and their use of their natural environment in a sustainable way. Puts us to shame, really, in terms of their husbandry of the natural environment, which not only provided for their needs, but also ensured that we had a really healthy environment too. So I think that's probably all I want to say by way of introduction. I'm looking forward to hearing your contributions this morning. As Michael said, I'm really passionate about this. We're very lucky in Devon. We have a real appetite amongst our communities. We have a fantastic set of intellectual resources as well as physical resources to support our agenda. Exeter University, as I'm sure others have told you, has more climate scientists in the top 100 than any other city in Europe, which is a real benefit to us. And lastly, I'll just touch on, I think, the opportunities for us in Devon around the government's levelling up and devolution agenda. Devon will be an early pilot for devolution discussions with government, and we have put climate change very much at the heart of the discussion we want to have with government. It's really important. We've found it time after time, as I'm sure you have, that whatever we do, even at a county level, we always need the national levers and national policy changes to help us. What we want to do through those devolution discussions is to see to what extent Devon can pilot new approaches, whether that's looking at potentially an energy improvement board, which looks at the broader issue of energy generation and consumption across the county, whether it's getting real government support in terms of planning reforms to help us with local nature recovery. All those things we want to have a dialogue with government about, and it's very much at the heart of our thinking. So quite exciting times, I think, massive challenges, but I'm really confident in the strength and the collaboration that we have in the county, and the enthusiasm that we have in the county to put us right at the forefront of both the carbon and biodiversity agendas. So at which point, having run over by 3 minutes, I will shut up and hand back to you, Michael.
Thank you. Only 1 minute according to my clock.
Oh,
so,
that's okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. That was a great start, and sort of inspiring in a sense as to how well placed Devon is to respond to some of these challenges. I think I see some questions coming in. We'll have a slot for questions after the next talk, so keep them coming in. So I'm going to hand over straight away to Harry Barton. Say equally flattering things about Harry. We're really lucky in Devon to have such a fine wildlife trust, one of the best in the country, really ably led by Harry and full of ideas. So Harry, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for that very flattering introduction. Can I just check, can everyone see a slide? Brilliant, thank you. Well, I'm going to talk about how the Nature Recovery Network can help us achieve net zero today. Now, before I do, I think a critical point that we have to acknowledge is that if we're going to meet this all-important milestone of net zero in Devon, just like anywhere else, 1, 2, and 3 priorities have got to be cutting our emissions. So we've got to cut our emissions from our vehicles, from our buildings, from all the embodied carbon and all this stuff we buy that Phil was referring to. That is absolutely critical. We cannot offset our way out of this problem. But having said that, nature can play a really important role. It can play a really important role in mitigation because it sucks carbon out of the atmosphere and stores it in plant material and in sediments and soils, etc. And it plays an almost as equally important role in adapting to the unfortunately inevitable impacts of climate change, which will be coming our way. And this is actually critical because there will be a point when, let's say we have stopped, let's say we've electrified everything in Devon, we have 0 carbon emissions. We are still going to have to keep sucking carbon out of the atmosphere for a while, because otherwise that carbon dioxide is going to sit there in the atmosphere warming the planet. So nature is going to play an absolutely critical role here. Now, one phrase we hear of a lot, if I can get my slideshow to move on, which is being slightly unwilling to do. Let's see if I press a different button, if anything else happens. Right, hopefully you can now see a picture that says nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions is a phrase that we hear a lot of at the moment. And basically what this is referring to is that the role that nature can play in solving big societal problems. So this might be the health of the population or soil erosion, which Phil referred to, or it could be flood risk or water quality or any of these things. But in this case, I'm referring to the role it can play in climate. And we've got all these habitats on land and at sea. So on land, we have peatland and woodlands. We spend a lot of time talking about those, but we also have grassland and wetlands and salt marsh. And in the sea, we have seagrass beds and kelp beds, and we have all those microorganisms that occupy a healthy sea, which are sequestering carbon. And when they die, they sink to the bottom of the sea and form these carbon-rich sediments, which accumulate over the years. And many scientists think that 37% of the whole of the climate problem could be solved by nature. I'm going to say about 1/3, but that's a very big, significant chunk of this issue, this big challenge we have, could be dealt with if, and it's a big if, we look after our nature properly. So how are we doing with our nature here in Devon? Again, here we are. So, well, we've got two big challenges. We've got lots of challenges, but I'd say we've got two sort of uber challenges with our nature here in Devon. The first is that we've lost most of it. Now, this slide here is showing a particular habitat called Coolm grassland, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, something of a Devon speciality. It used to occupy very large tracts of northwest Devon and northeast Cornwall. But as you can see from this slide, it's been reduced now to lots of tiny little fragments. And in fact, the way the data is illustrated here makes it look like there's slightly more than there actually is. But even there, you can see how mainly very small scattered fragments, no more than 1.5% of the landscape now covered by this habitat. So that's the first issue. We've lost an awful lot of it. And the second issue is that what we have is not always in the best of conditions. So I mentioned peat bogs earlier on. Peat bogs, absolutely crucial habitat for this subject because they store so much carbon. But on the left here, you see a nice healthy peat bog from up on Dartmoor. And, you know, very, very, very wet, very boggy, not hugely biodiverse because it's a bleak area, but you have these wonderful plants like butterwort and this very intriguing carnivorous plant, the sundew, which you find in healthy bogs. But increasingly, our peat bogs on Dartmoor are starting to look like this, particularly in the summer. And I'm sorry to say, even after extended dry patches like the one we've just had. So you can see the water there has disappeared. You can see that the quality of the sward around there has become much less interesting. And as this dries out, the peat starts to oxidize, comes and turns into carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this becomes a net source of carbon dioxide instead of a net sink of carbon dioxide. And then the peat compacts over time. And then when it does rain, then often what happens is that the water doesn't sink in, it just flies straight down the slope and causing all sorts of problems downstream and taking plenty of carbon with it. So this is the kind of problem we have, and only 1/6 of our peatlands on Dartmoor are now in good condition. We've got 120 square kilometres of this in Devon, far more than anywhere else in southern England, but only 1/6 currently in good condition. So we have some work to do. This is the kind of thing, this is what we really want a nice valley mire to look like. So what targets do we set ourselves through the Nature Recovery Network? Well, scientists think that we need at least 30% of our land and sea, sorry, I haven't got too much time to talk about sea today, but others will be covering it, but 30% of our land and sea in recovery for wildlife. And when I say in recovery for wildlife, I mean moving in the right direction. You obviously can't recreate an ancient woodland overnight. It's going to take centuries, but you can set it off in the right direction. But that figure of 30% is contingent on the second one. That's assuming that all of it is in good condition. Otherwise, we'd need more. Now, the state of play currently in Devon, and we are by no means the worst county in the country. The current state of play is about 15% of land in recovery for wildlife. So that's about half of it. So we need to double the area we have. And only about 1/3 of it is in good condition. So we need to treble the condition target that we currently have. So we have a lot of work to do. Now, some of this can happen in a sort of opportunistic, haphazard way, but I would argue that there are at least 3 very good reasons why we have to be extremely thoughtful and planned about how we do this. And the first is the very simple problem that we don't have enough land to do all the things that we'd like to do here in Devon or anywhere in the UK, in fact. Now, this is a study called Food Printing Oxford that I was kind of involved with about 10 years ago. And what this study tried to do was work out how much land you need to feed a city like Oxford, which is not dissimilar in population to Exeter. And the answer is you need quite a large area. You need an area a lot bigger than the city. Now, if you were to do this exercise and build in London and Birmingham and Manchester and Glasgow and Plymouth and whatnot everywhere, you would very quickly find that we don't have enough land in the UK to feed ourselves, and that's just feeding ourselves. You then throw in everything else. I need the carbon, living space, space to offset carbon and everything else, and you quickly find that we're in quite a lot of trouble. So in the UK, we're the 9th highest. We have the 9th highest ecological deficit of any country. What this is basically saying is that if you take if you look at the amount of resources that we need as a population, and then you look at the amount of land we have available to provide those resources, how balanced are you? And the answer in our case is that we're very unbalanced. So expressed in another way, we use our annual allocation of the Earth's resources by early May. So we are more than double, using more than double that we have available in land. Now, I'm not saying what's more important here. I'm just saying we've got an issue. And this comes to the National Food Strategy. This is where Henry Dimblby's excellent report, in my view, was trying to illustrate this point in a different way. So he was saying here, basically, about 30% of all land is 30% of the planet is land, about 70% of that is usable land, about half of that is agriculture, and about 3/4 of that is used to feed livestock, or used for livestock, which only produces about 20% of our calorie needs. Now, I'm not trying to say what's the right or wrong way to use our land. All I'm trying to say here is that we are going to have to do some very, very clever number crunching and take some very brave decisions if we're going to work out the answer to this problem. And that is one of the reasons why we need to be very careful and very thoughtful about where we restore nature. The second reason is because not all habitats are equal when it comes to restoring wildlife. Now, these are some figures taken from a report that we commissioned a year or so ago at the Wildlife Trust. And what this is saying is what really matters here is not only what your end land use is, not just what you're trying to restore a bit of land to, but also what your starting point was. So if you take an area of land that has been drained, peatland has been drained to grow arable crops, which is the case in quite a lot of East Anglia, on the former marshes there, and you restore it to peatland, you get a massive gain in carbon sequestration. If you take an area of arable and you change it from arable to, say, green manure crops, you get a modest increase in carbon sequestration. Not much, but you get a modest one. And if you take intensive grass and change it to restore it to mixed broadleaf woodland, you get somewhere in the middle. But from this, you can see that we have to be very careful we're very, very thoughtful about what we are trying to create where, if we want to get our maximum bangs for bucks in carbon sequestration. And the third reason really builds on, jumping ahead here, on the other two. We don't have enough resources to do everything we want to do everywhere. So we have to look at where we have overlapping goals, and we can get win-wins. This is a study that we did with the University of Exeter, an environment agency. Nicola Ellis, the PhD student, excellent piece of work. And what Nicola was looking at was that how this habitat corn grassland, which I mentioned earlier on, the role it can play in slowing the flow of water and storing water, because these are really important for water regulation in the county. It's also a very important habitat for wildlife, and it's extremely effective at securing carbon. So by throwing these, not throwing together, but by sort of marrying these different sets of data, we can find the places where we can get real win-wins. If we can restore a habitat in this particular location, this particular type, we will benefit carbon, we'll benefit wildlife, we'll benefit flood control. Do it elsewhere, you may not get those same benefits. So these are the reasons why it's so important. And this is where the Nature Recovery Network comes in. So the Nature Recovery Network is a lovely concept. It's slightly motherhood and apple pie. But the motherhood and apple pie bit is that you have a third of all our land and our sea that's there in recovery for wildlife. It connects the uplands with the lowlands. It connects urban areas with rural areas. It interweaves with farming and all these other land uses, and it's all fantastic. The Nature Recovery Network map is the hard graft end of this. This is the crunchy bit we have to do on the ground to make sure this actually happens. And we start by needing to understand what wildlife habitat we have out there. Sounds easy, believe me, it's not. It took us 2 years just to update one part of one habitat, which is woodland. But this map here shows broadly the wildlife habitat that we've got. It makes it look like we've got slightly more than we actually have, but you get the sense, very, very scattered, mainly small fragments all the way across the county. But that's our crucial starting point. We then look at habitat potentiality. So this is, you take any piece of land, what could it be? And in the case of Devon, it could probably be two things. If given enough time and everything left alone, most parts of Devon would eventually revert to some sort of woodland. And there are lots of different types of woodland, so it's important to know what type of woodland it might turn into. They're all allocated numbers. But attractive as it may seem in a sort of fairy tale to have the whole of Devon as one enormous wildwood with baying wolves and other fell beasts there, actually it's slightly impractical, and much of our wildlife is adapted to more open habitats, so grasslands and bogs and heathland and things like that. So we want to make room for those habitats too. And those are mainly successional habitats. So there's some way, they exist for some way on the journey between something that's been heavily disturbed and something that's reverted to woodland. So we also map what that sort of secondary type of habitat might be. And that gives a sort of very multicolored map like the one you see here. We can drill down, this is obviously at a very large scale, we can drill down to a much smaller scale and look at this almost on a field by field basis, which makes this a very powerful decision-making tool. And just looking at a quick example here, so this is an area of South Devon. You can see the Dart estuary on the right-hand side, and then to the left-hand side, you can see the River Avon Valley. So this is quite close to where I live. And you can see here what we've mapped out in a very crude way, the existing habitat areas. And you can see 3 yellow blobs there, and those are 3 separate farms. Now, if we were to overlay on this some data of the about habitat potentiality, I can't show you all of it, or the map would just appear sort of black, that you can see this is what you start to see. So the farm on the west, we would say, well, in this particular farm, you're probably wanting to encourage the farmer to restore purple moor and rush pasture with W6 woodland. Never mind what W6 is, it's just a type of woodland. The farm in the middle, lowland dry-acid grassland with W10 woodland, a different type of woodland. And then on the east, you'll be looking at another type of woodland again, a lowland calcareous grassland. So this, again, is very sort of broad brush approach, but we can get much more detailed and much cleverer than this if we want to. So this is a really powerful tool to try and direct us to where it's most effective to make change and what those changes should be. Now, everything I've talked about so far has been about mitigating climate change, and I'm nearly out of time, so I'm just going to make a very quick nod to adapting to climate change, because a lot of things are going to happen even if we switched off all emissions tomorrow. A lot of this change is still going to happen for a few decades, and we're going to have to adapt to it. So one example of this is in urban areas, and we have our headquarters at Devon Wildlife Trust gets flooded quite regularly by these very intensive, flashy rainfall events we have, funnily enough, particularly in the summer. And this is such an area. This is an area called the North Brook in Exeter, and we are looking. At the moment, the North Brook is a river that runs past this heavily canalised, like many rivers going through urban areas, and quite compacted ground around it. So this is a plan. It's only a plan. It's not been approved yet. This is just, we're working on it, but this is the kind of thing we'd like to do. So to rewild, if you like, that river course a little bit, make it much more sinuous, allow spaces for it to spill out in the surrounding landscape. And that would mean that you get great wildlife benefits, probably carbon benefits too, but you would also reduce the impact of flashy floods on this particular community. Here's another very different example. This is a place called Aussie Island in North Devon. It's one of many places around the country where we are seeing sea defences being attacked by rising sea levels and also increasing storms. The outer walls here have already breached, and that's why this turned 4 years ago from an area of unimproved grassland into this, what looks like a lake now, but most of the time, because this is a very high tide, but most of the time it's a mixture of mud flats and salt marsh. Fantastic place for wildlife, and we bought it as a nature reserve. But you can see what's going to happen. Look on the left-hand side of the slide here, wine for 25 years, you got a number of options. You spend a lot of money raising those sea defences, you let nature take its course, and there's probably a cataclysmic breach at some point in the future, or you have some sort of managed change here. And again, the Nature Recovery Network can help us decide where to do these things. Some areas we will need to protect, some areas we just will not be able to protect. Other areas, it might be that we can do something managed. And we need tools to help us do this properly and thoughtfully across the county. Just nearly finished now, just looking to the future, we can add more and more layers of data to this Nature Recovery Network mapping. On the right, you see a very crude attempt to do this in terms of carbon sequestration. So over the next year, we want to be able to look at every single square kilometre of Devon and be able to say, what's its potential to sequester carbon? And that will be so powerful as a tool to link the carbon and the nature agendas together. And on the left, you see marine. So the other thing we want to do over the next year is to do this whole exercise from the marine habitats too, because they are just as important, even though they don't have the same impact on our day-to-day life. And just finishing off now, I'll just end where I started, which is just to emphasize that point that number one priority has got to be to cut our emissions. That is the single most important thing we can do. But nature can still play a really important role in this, and we need to look after it properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Harry. We've got 5 minutes for questions. Peter, you've probably been looking. I've picked out one that was direct to Phil, which was about the how we best align climate, carbon, and nature plans cross county, Blackdown Hills, A and B, straddling Devon and Somerset. That whole issue. Phil, have you got any comments on that one?
As I said, I think we probably need to have a bit of a get together once we've produced the carbon plan, because we say with the carbon plan's a framework, but what we didn't want to do is to stop organisations doing all the things that they wanted to do in the meantime, and particularly getting down to community level. But I think probably my sense is once the carbon plan is published, it would be a good idea to have a kind of an audit and just to check the alignment of the effort that's going on, hopefully, because a lot of the organisations are involved either directly or vicariously in the work of the Climate Emergency Response Group through intermediary bodies, such as the Local Nature Partnership. Those alignments are sort of happening naturally, but I think there'll be a really helpful point, I think, when we can sort of take stock about how well the whole of the effort is aligned. So that would be my suggestion, because it's really just because everyone really wants to get cracking, don't they, and get on doing stuff. But on the other hand, I think we just need to take some points of the journey when we just look and say, is everything aligned? Are we all pointing in the same direction? Have we avoided duplication? Are there the synergies there that we would hope?
Thanks, Phil. Peter, did you want to highlight any questions?
Yeah, there's a few other questions coming in now, but I think if we put some to Harry. So there was a possibly rhetorical question from Nicola, just asking about how does the amount of land needed to feed people depend on the type of diet that people adopt. So Harry, you sort of tried to avoid commenting too much, but perhaps you could say something about what the Devon Carbon Plan says on that topic.
Sure. Well, the National Food Strategy makes no bones about this, and it says that it's not suggesting that everyone turns vegan or even vegetarian, but it is suggesting that we need to reduce our meat consumption as a society overall, and it suggests reducing this by 30%. 30% is this magic figure that seems to be the answer to absolutely everything. So I'm slightly suspicious of that, but I think we can take it that some reduction is necessary. Having said that, it's never as simple as that on the ground. So this, Dartmoor, for instance, is grazed. Are we suggesting that we actually want to stop grazing Dartmoor and start growing arable crops all over it? No, we're not. So there will be ideal types of land use for particular areas. But if you look at the picture globally, it seems very little doubt that we need to change our diet, and we probably need to do more than just that. We probably need to look at taking quite a bit of volume production indoors as well, which we now have the technology to do. Some of this is happening anyway, I have to say, but my personal concern is that we do it in a kind of a planned, thoughtful way, not just sort of haphazardly led by the market and particular individuals.
Okay, there's a helpful challenge, sort of whilst welcoming the analysis that you presented, just saying what's happening in terms of action, but perhaps that could be answered as we sort of progress throughout this morning's events. But there is a useful question there from Sue, just saying, how are we going to convince farmers to actually use this mapping that you've referred to in the current situation? How is it relevant to them? Where's the funding that's going to help them to achieve the potential that you've set out? And why isn't the County Farms Estate being used as an exemplar in this?
I mean, I would say there are probably three parts to that answer. I think first of all, you need to have a set of tools which you can take to a farmer or a landowner, so we can say, okay, we've got these particular answers to these particular problems, and those are being worked on all the time. I think the second is that we need to have a proper funding mechanism. ELMS, what we've seen of it, goes some of the way, but I think it needs to go a lot further. Personally, I think the Sustainable Farm Incentive is very disappointing. We haven't yet seen anything about the Local Nature Recovery Scheme, but hopefully that will be more exciting, but we'll have to see. And then the third crucial element is about relationships with farmers. So as many of you know, do an awful lot of one-to-one work with farmers. It's the single biggest thing we do, and we advise up to 600 farmers at any one time in the county. And every farmer has a different starting point. Some are very keen on the environment to start with, some are passionate about climate change, some aren't, they're interested in other things. But the key thing is to find your way in. And once you've found a way and you get a relationship going, it's amazing how you can bring former skeptics on board. So I think I'd say those three elements are the things that we need to focus on.
Okay, thanks, Harry. Peter, I think we ought to move on. If you can correct some of the other questions. I set a hair running, if that's not mixing metaphors, amongst the trees with my early comments at the beginning. So, but that will obviously be picked up by Rosie later as to what trees and where. I think we better move on. So again, another great speaker coming up. Really happy. Matt represents the whole marine sector on the partnership, and make sure that we don't, we do look beyond Dartmoor and Colne Grassland and go out to sea from time to time. So I hand over to you, Matt, to tell us about some of the climate impacts on the marine environment.
Thank you very much. Let me just make sure I can share my screen. 1 moment. Right, 1 second. Right, that should be shared now, and you should be seeing the slideshow. Excellent, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And as Mike said, it's always a slightly big ask because, of course, whereas on land you tend to have people representing the farmland, the forests, and different sectors. Marine is huge, so I always feel slightly nervous when somebody says Matt's representing marine. So it's very much an overview. And what I want to do is talk about some of the work that we do with the Marine Climate Change Impacts Partnership, and then draw that back as much as possible to how we're trying to address things at a more regional level, which of course is more relevant to a partnership such as the Devon Local Nature Partnership. So I chair MSIP. I'm also on the board of the LNP, and I just want to say a little bit about MSIP because I think this is it's a model that we've been using for, well, getting on for 20 years now. It's the government's main advisory body for marine climate impacts in the UK, and how it works is we act as a sort of a bridge between the scientific community, who are gathering all the evidence, and then the government and managers, the decision makers, government departments, and those who need this information. And we're led by a wide network of stakeholders that form our steering group, which are made up of various government departments, NGOs, industry, and various others. And the reason we were set up, and the reason it's important, is because, as I said, representing marine, the sheer amount of information on marine climate impacts, but now, of course, moving towards issues around adaptation, mitigation, is just enormous. And it got to the stage in 2005 where UK government just said, look, we don't, we just need summaries. If we've got a question, it might be a parliamentary question, it might be something to inform one of our government agencies. We need some information, and we don't know how to gather this, and we don't know how to present this easily to ministers and others who have to make these decisions. And if you look here, here's a timeline. I mean, going back, early on, 1824 is probably the first mention of the warm effect of the Earth's atmosphere, and then there's a sort of almost 30-year gap, and then the greenhouse effect. The term was coined by John Tyndall, and you have these sort of various points being raised among the science community, and CO2 and ocean acidity was first mentioned in the 50s, but then all of a sudden you get, particularly towards the late 80s and into our current time, and you can see all of a sudden you've got these IPCC assessments, you've got at the international, the national, and the local level just this huge amount of of information available. And if I had time, I do another talk where I show how many papers and things, you know, it goes from 1 or 2 papers a year, you know, up to about 1900 to thousands and thousands of papers coming out. So the idea of this partnership is to try and get people out there an easy way of grasping what's going on, whether it's international, national or local. And you can look here, there's some of the international reports that have come out recently, and then some of the more local things that are going on at the bottom. So we're trying to gather all that information and provide advice. Just very quickly, you can read the paper on this if you want, but we stick to a model as well, which is very much about ensuring that all the information we provide is trustworthy. That's what it boils down to. We've got no axe to grind. We're not campaigning. We're not lobbying. And all the scientific community that we work with have to trust completely that when we present their information, we're presenting the science and not presenting a spin on that science or using it to lobby for anything in particular. And we have published the model that has been taken up by quite a few others on how to give that information. The most recent piece of work we did, just to show you the sort of breadth of what we're doing, was actually in the UK overseas territories. So very briefly, I'm going from Devon right to the other extreme, just to sort of say, you know, we work all around the world, and we published a report last year, which was launched on July the 21st with a ministerial address from Lord Goldsmith. And we had all the governments and various representatives from the different regions, from the 14 UK overseas territories, and we published on not just what the impacts were, but also what might be needed to be looked at in terms of adaptation and mitigation. So you can see we're working right across the different ranges from international to local. Our last national report card was actually 2020. And just to give you an idea of, and you can go online, I'll give the URL at the end and have a look at this, but we work with more than 150 scientists on this report from 50 research organizations. And what we do is we give the view from the science community on climate impacts in the marine environment across physical, ecological, and societal impacts. And we commissioned 26 different reviews from the scientists. And each time we do a review, we add different sectors or different things that we want to publish on. So in this case, we added oxygen, cultural heritage, transport, and infrastructure. So the idea is wherever you're working, whether it's local government, national government, or whatever, you can dip into our reports and say, well, what's the latest information on transport and infrastructure in the marine environment, and find that information. Now, bring it down to sort of probably what's more relevant to this audience is what we ask our scientists to do, even though they're working at the national level, is to try and identify regional level impacts, or at least to present the information in a way that we can draw out regional level impacts. But it's incredibly difficult in the marine environment because it's so holistic and so connected. Once again, you can't draw a boundary around it and call it a forestry managed area or a sea. It's all connected. And here's a good example. So this is looking at the trend in annual sea surface temperatures from 1988 to 2017. And actually, if you look around the UK, what you can see is north and sort of northeast of the UK, in the North Sea area and the southern North Sea, that you see a statistically significant warming trend. However, if you come down to the southwest, you can see that in that period, there are a lot of places where, at least within that time slice, it's not statistically significant, which actually surprises a lot of people, because over the 100-year time slice, which I'll come on to, it's statistically significant warming. Our sea temperatures are warming, but if you take this, the reason you're not seeing warming over this period is because of what they call the blue blob on the left. So what I'm saying is, in the southwest, we're being affected by these large scale changes that are going on in the North Atlantic, which we have to take into account, as well as the direct warming coming from air temperatures, which is why you're seeing warming to the east and perhaps not so much to the west, at least when you drill down. And if you look at the picture over a longer time frame, what you see is something like this. You can break up the UK into the different regions, and if you look second to bottom, there's the Western Channel, Celtic Sea region. And you can see that clearly there is a warming trend once you start looking at a century and up, and some of the warmest years on record have come out recently, but there's a lot of variability within that. Now, I'm not going to go into much more detail here, A, because I'm not an oceanographer and I'll probably end up getting lost somewhere down the line, but B, because the whole point of this is to show you that when you're dealing with marine, we can say Devon marine environment, Cornwall marine environment, or Southwest marine environment, but it's actually phenomenally complicated because we're having to disentangle the impacts being driven at very large global ocean basin scale from those that are occurring locally as well. So when we're looking at regional impacts, this is always a challenge. So what do we do once we've identified these impacts? Well, one of the things that we then do is we don't give advice, but we do give scenarios. So what this is from a report we did going back to 2016 now, where we looked at the marine protected areas and we used all the modeling of how temperature might change. And then we asked the simple question, okay, well, if these models play out, what does that mean, or could it mean for all our marine protected areas around the UK? And if you see, all of this is available online if you're interested, but if you look here, it could mean that the quality of a feature changes in an MPA. So we give some examples how this increased carbon dioxide uptake, for instance, could actually help with some growth of seagrass, which is an interesting thing to look at. You might get features appearing in a particular area. So we've said in some MPAs, because of the change of temperature, and we give some examples of this, where around the southwest, we're actually seeing the long-standing type of kelp that we've had for years being replaced with one that's come over from France, a more southern species, because of the temperature change. And I won't go through all of these, but you can see you have to ask this picture, and this is actually very relevant to adaptation and mitigation and recovery, because of course what we're saying is we're in a dynamic environment. As Harry's pointed out, we are living with the effects of climate, whether we like it or not, for a while, and it's a key question we have to ask. If we're going to look at restoring a particular habitat, will the sea surface temperature mean that that habitat will be able to thrive there in 10 years or 20 years? So we're not just planning for what we're doing now, we need to plan for the future as well. So once we produce that report, that then gets taken by others who want to do some work on that. In this case, the Joint Nature Conservation Committee took a lead, and they looked at lots of the different features that exist within our marine protected areas, and came up with an adaptation plan, but also hinting at mitigation. And this is where you start to look at things like seagrass, salt marsh, mearl beds, and all these habitats that we have lots of in the southwest. We ask questions around how we adapt to climate change, but also which of those, in the light of these climate models, would be suitable for nature recovery plans, for example. And then that then starts to lead into the whole question around blue carbon and restoration. And I've only, you can see on the bottom right there, this is something that Steve Gilbert, the Devon Maritime Forum, took the lead on setting up. But we ran, I can't remember, Steve, if you're on this call, I think you are, if it was last year or the year before with COVID, all the time goes all over the place, but we ran this Devon Maritime Forum, and we got some experts in to ask the question on the whole blue carbon issue. Where should we be restoring in terms of blue carbon? What habitat should we be restoring? And one of the challenges we have, and I think this is as true in the marine sector as anywhere else, there are lots of plans and lots of projects, lots of people doing really exciting things. And if I had more time, I'd go through seagrass restoration projects and what's being done with salt marsh and various other bits, but it's kind of scattered everywhere at the moment, and it's quite a challenge to gather all that information into one place. But I'd say ultimately, going back to this report, which is a fairly old report now, but this sums it up nicely. I mean, we're simply asking what habitats are best at capturing carbon, so tons of carbon per hectare per year, And then how much of that habitat have we got and do we need? And these are global figures, but straight away you can see in the UK that estuaries, seagrass and salt marshes are things that we've got an awful lot of, and things that we can really work on in terms of restoration. So where are we now? Well, at the moment, as I said, you can please go online and have a look at this. But what we're doing is we're moving from just capturing the impacts, which we're still doing. So you can still see the impacts of climate change across the regions at the national and international level, across the different areas and ecosystems, but we're focusing much more now on the policy management response. And one of the things we're trying to do in particular is work more with industry, for example. So we have done work with Seafish, we've done work with the UK marine leisure industry, and we're trying to work with NGOs and government agencies and many more in looking at what the potential solutions are to the climate impacts. So we recently put out a call to an update for experts. So if you go onto our new webpage, we have 26 different areas that we report on. And what we're doing now is we're reporting on a rolling basis. And in 2022, 6 of these projects, and I can't remember which 6 it is off the top of my head, are being updated. So we'll have 6 new reports this year. So for example, sea surface temperature is one we do regularly. We'll update the sea surface temperature models, both nationally, but also drawing out what's happening in the Southwest and the other regions. And we'll be reporting on that on our new online searchable hub. And as I said, with clear regional breakdowns. And we're looking for experts the whole time so we can report across all of these sectors. And there's going to be a much, much greater focus now on impacts and solutions. So one of the things we're doing is working with partners at the moment on restoration and blue carbon, but our job isn't to run projects ourselves or to reinvent the wheel. It's actually to see what's out there and actually package that so that when we get asked by government departments or others what they need to do or what decisions they should be making, MSIP provides that one-stop shop so they can go online and find all of this information. So that's a little bit of a whiz through, a little bit of an overview on what we're doing. Please go to our website, go to these various hubs, find out what information is there, and we would love to get feedback from you, because our intention is that in terms of, you know, from the Southwest or any region, that you'll be able to go on here and extract information in a way that is useful. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now. So.
You're on mute, Michael.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I clicked it. Thank you very much, Matt. A lot there, and for those of us who are not experts in marine, I always think, gosh, I wish I knew more. I wish I understood more. But you gave us a lot to know and understand. I do hope the presentations can be made available. I'm sure they can, because there was a tremendous amount in that. So thank you very much indeed, Matt. We will come to questions later. Let me just, so I'm just checking my timetable. We're okay on time. So now I'm going to move, we're going to move back on land. We're going to move back to soils and to Becky, the Business Development and Technical Director, Farm Carbon Toolkit. So Farm Carbon Toolkit is a farmer-led initiative. We've mentioned farmers quite a lot today, and you know, at the end of the day, it's farmers that manage much of our soil. So the importance of soil health and carbon, really, really important. And this is a very practical kind of farmer-friendly way of trying to assess soil and improve. So I'll hand straight over to Becky for this presentation, please.
Thank you ever so much, Michael. And yeah, it's lovely to be here with you this morning. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to be talking to you this morning about the whole area of what farmers can do to raise soil carbon levels. I think we've had some really fascinating presentations this morning looking at the role of nature-based solutions, both within our land, and then also just there in terms of what the potential is within our marine environment. I'm very much focusing on the work that I get involved with on a day-to-day basis, I'm often giving talks like this from a hole in a field to groups of farmers, so it's nice to be in a different environment today. But very much what I'll be talking to you about this morning is the work that we've been doing with farmers to look at that bigger picture around how farmers can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, how that's linked through to business resilience, to energy resilience, to improve soil health. But as I say, my task this morning was to focus very much on that soil bit of it, in terms of what is the potential for agriculture to contribute to some of these solutions through enhanced soil carbon sequestrations. And more importantly, what does that do in terms of enhancing that resilience on the farm, in terms of some of those other ecosystem services that are taking place through what our farmers are up to. So yes, I work for Farm Carbon Toolkit. We're a farmer-led organisation which was set up back in 2009. So although climate and all these things have very much been the focus over the last 18 months, we've been talking about this for over 10 years now. We're farmer-led, so we were set up by farmers for farmers, and the real aim is just to try and provide those practical tools and resources that can help farmers understand what to do differently around trying to manage greenhouse gas emissions on the farm. So we have a carbon calculator that farmers can use to calculate their current carbon balance, so areas on the farm that are generating emissions, and then on the other side, what's happening in terms of where they're holding carbon, both from within their woodlands and their habitats, but then also what's happening within their soils. But then we also have a toolkit. So some of you have already been mentioning in the sort of chat, so what? So we very much try and address that so what question around, well, what are the things that they can actually do differently around some of those practical measures, and what impact do they have? But I'm here to talk to you this morning about soil, and I think, it was mentioned right in the beginning in terms of the importance of soil. And despite everything we've done as humans, and I'm sure all the fantastic research that's going on in all those hallowed research institutes that we might have on the call, we owe our existence to the fact that we have 6 inches of topsoil and the fact that it rains. So soil is so fundamentally important to everything else that we do on top of it, both from a food production perspective, but also from a ecosystem services perspective, from a climate regulation, and all those other things as well. So it's incredibly important, and for farmers, it's their most valuable asset. Because if those soils are healthy and well managed, then good things will flow off them. If those soils are unhealthy, if they're actually not doing what they need to be doing from a physical, chemical or biological health point, not only will they be producing, less good quality food, but also we'll be getting into some of those other issues that we might have around things like nutrient runoff, soil loss, water, all those other sort of things that we don't want to get to. But obviously we're here to talk about carbon, but carbon is intrinsically linked to soil health. So if we think about the sides of sustainable soil management, we've often talked about as our soil health triangle. We need our soil to be in good physical health. Now, physical health is all about how our soil is put together and the sort of architecture that provides that structure within our soil. Does our soil have the right amount of water and air? What's the combination of minerals that it has within there? And soil carbon is incredibly important for those physical properties, because carbon is also linked to how much clay content there is in the soil, but also how that soil will perform in terms of providing that good habitat and architecture that's needed for those plant roots to be able to do what they need to do. We also need our soils to be in good chemical health, so we need them to have a good balance in terms of their pH and their nutrient content and all those other sort of things. And again, carbon is an incredibly important part of that chemical health story, providing those sites for those nutrients to be able to hold on to, providing that buffering capability and everything else that flows through it. And then if we start thinking about the fact that our soil is alive and is absolutely, an alive ecosystem, soil carbon is the fuel that feeds that system. So again, if we're thinking about soil carbon from a climate perspective, yes, it is incredibly important, but it's also incredibly important in terms of that ability to allow our soil to function in the way that we need it to do in terms of what we want to happen above ground with healthy and resilient functioning ecosystems. But what is soil carbon? It's basically decomposing plants and the energy of your sun flowing through your soil. If you think about what makes up soil, 45% is actually minerals, so the amount of sand, silt and clay that makes up that soil type. Quarter of it should be water and a quarter of it should be air. Again, if we have some of those options like Harry was talking about earlier, where they might be a little bit compacted, we might squash some of that air out of it. And that remaining 5% is organic matter. And that organic matter is anything that is alive or has been alive within your soil. And 60% of that organic matter is organic carbon. And again, it's that underground industry that just supports the sustainability of your farm and more widely our landscapes and everything else that's happening within our natural environments. But even if we're not interested, as I say, for soil organic carbon for the climate perspective, if we can improve soil carbon, there's an incredibly good link there with improved yields and improved performance on farm. Because actually, if we build soil carbon, it will also help improve our productivity. It will help improve nutrient use efficiency, water holding capacity, porosity, how we can hold on to nutrients, and also that aggregation, or how our soil particles are put together and what those provide. So if it's so amazing, why are we not doing more about it? Well, it's a little bit complicated. As I've said, we've got this complex biological system where there's lots of interactions going on in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and how that links through. We're also doing this at the same time as trying to produce food. So again, it's part of that discussion, or manage the landscapes in different ways. The other interesting thing we have, and this is part of the discussions when we start talking about soil carbon, is that soil carbon and soil organic matter, there are different forms of it within our soils. And they also have different lifespans. So we can think of our soil a little bit like our bank account, okay? And we have our current account, or our particulate organic matter. And that's where there's lots and lots of activity. That carbon cycle is happening, and it tends to happen quite near the surface of our soil. And that's where there's lots of carbon coming in and lots of carbon going out, a little bit like your bank account, okay? And ideally, you want to have it where you've got more coming in than going out, but that will depend on whether it's sale season or Christmas or other bits of time of the year, okay? But then we've also got our mineral associated organic matter, which is our long-term carbon, which is much less likely to be released. And as farmers, the challenge is to start to move some of that active cycling carbon down into our savings account, because that is where that true process of sequestration happens. Because sequestration is actually that long-term locking up of that carbon, rather than that carbon that's just as part helping with that enhanced soil function. And so this is sometimes where we have some of the confusions and the challenges, is actually there is a difference between these two types of activity that is happening within the carbon cycle. And our challenge as farmers and as land managers is to start to make sure that we can optimize our conditions and our soils are as healthy as possible, but we can also facilitate the process of that transfer to long-term carbon sequestration, which is that carbon solution. And these are some of the things that we've been looking at over the last 5 years, really trying to understand what's possible in terms of enhanced carbon sequestration. And we've been doing this through our soil carbon project. And that's been a partnership project that's worked with not just some of our research institutes and businesses, but also worked on over 100 farms for the last 5 years, really trying to understand 3 key things. How do we measure soil carbon? How do we manage soil carbon? And how do we model it over the future? Because a bit like Harry was putting up in some of his presentation earlier, we have modeled systems that work. But for farmers, what we really need to understand is what is the impact of some of those management practices, rather than doing those long-term changes from arable to grass and grassland to woodland. Actually, within those broad spectrums, what can those farmers do? And so a key part of that has been understanding how do we test for organic matter and organic carbon, what the link is. Understanding the impact not just of the testing methodology, but also the depth that we're sampling at. Understanding the link between those soil tests and also some proxy measures, and allowing that to sort of understand and show the impact of management practice on enhanced carbon sequestration. And one of the things that we've produced out of the back of our soil carbon project is a field guide. So if anybody is working with farmers, or you can do it, doesn't have to be on farm, but if you're interested in sampling for soil carbon or understanding more about soil health, we have a downloadable guide on our website, which provides lots of information about all the key questions around measuring soil carbon within our landscapes. So what are the options then in terms of what we can actually do? Well, traditionally, if we look at what policy and what the sort of traditional research has showed us, the only way that we can change or add soil carbon into our system is that land use change. So a bit like some of those tables that Harry showed earlier. So we're changing our land use from one type to another. And obviously, if we're moving away from types of land management that has a lot of cultivation and disturbance within them, then and we're reducing that amount of disturbance, then that is enhancing the amount of carbon that's there. There's also some of these really broad ideas and broad practices that we can do. If we reduce the amount of soil that's running out of the gate, then not only is that reducing the amount of nutrients and everything else that's taking, it's also reducing the amount of carbon that's being lost. We can feed more carbon into the system. So again, if we go back to our banking analogy, we can spend less or we can put more in, okay? And both of those will also help to build up what's there. And also there's some work being done looking at the impact of things like reduced tillage, incorporating crop residues and cover crops, and really starting to look at those deep rooting structures. So actually not just focusing on what's going on at the top, but also starting to measure what's happening further down. But nothing is straightforward in agriculture. And what we need to remember is that there is these complex biological systems. And again, thinking about, we want to make sure that we don't do this and actually then lead to the law of unintended consequences where we've got more emissions coming. So it's really starting to look at it within that complex biological system and really having a nod at what the impact of these management decisions or these management practices are, not just on soil carbon, but also on that reduction in emissions, which is also one of our key priorities. So it can be a little bit of a confusing picture for farmers. And so these are sort of some of the discussions that we have with a lot of our farmers, in the fact that, you know, they understand and they know that those soil organic carbon stocks need to be protected and increased. And there are a variety of methods that you can do that. And we're doing that because of its wider role in maintaining soil health and crop quality, as well as those climate solutions. But we really need to have that evidence in terms of what works between some of these management practices so that we can provide targeted information back to farmers about the benefits of some of these systems. So again, rather than just saying reduce tillage, actually, is it a case that they have to go away from ploughing completely, or is there an opportunity for min-till? What's the importance of this of the species diversity within grasslands, for example? Does it have to be a magic number? Do we have to have 7 species, or actually is 5, you know, less good than 13? All these sort of things. So actually putting the detail on some of this information, understanding the difference between cover crops and catch crops, and understanding all these different management practices that are all being advocated, really starting to quantify the benefit of those, and having to do that across a range of different soil types, farming systems and rotations. And this is one of the challenges when we start trying to look at the potential for soil carbon compared to some of those sort of habitat-based solutions, is that there is a lot of complexity in how we model it and how we measure it. But from a farm system, what is best for my system? So really starting to think about how soil carbon fits with those wider farm objectives. And within that individual farm's soil type, rotation and system, what's the best thing that they can do? As we've already spoken about, with rising prices, with limited time, you know, what's the thing that they can do that is going to make the most difference? And also starting to be able to quantify the benefits of those changing practices, not just for their soil, but also further up in terms of what's the impact on their crop, their soil health, or their livestock and their business resilience. And then very much back down to that practical stuff about, okay, how do we do it? So what I thought I'd do just to finish off is show some of the results that we've got in terms of some of those overall conclusions from all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of holes that we've been spending the last 5 or 6 years digging, really. So with our soil carbon project, we found that we can measure soil carbon. And that's great, because a lot of people think it's too difficult, but we can do it. We've also found that farmers can build soil carbon. Okay, so it's not about saying it's actually all about we have to protect the carbon that we've already got, but there is opportunities for farmers to build soil carbon. But the really important thing is that how they manage their land is the bit that has an impact. So it's not just about saying grassland arable. It's actually delving down into the detail of how those landscapes are being managed and what that means. And it's really important to look at that bigger picture around looking at the whole farm footprint and the impacts of those practices on reducing emissions and enhancing carbon sequestration. And some of the things that we really have been able to pull out from the data. So we have been able to see that there is an impact since that land has been tilled or ploughed. Obviously that ploughing, you know, suddenly releases carbon as that oxygen stimulates the microbes within our soil. There is an impact of the grazing system that's used. But again, we're just starting to pull the data together. There is an impact of rotation and there is an impact of cultivation system. We've also found the impact of testing depth. So understanding where within the soil profile that is being tested for and the amount of clay that's in the soil. And we've also linked it with some soil health indicators and being able to ground truth those results. So it's really, really positive. But we've not stopped there. We've continued, and at the moment we're working on a farm net zero project. I'm afraid it's happening just over the Tamar in Cornwall, but we've got activities taking place until 2025, and we've got 3 demonstration farms with the challenge of getting them to net zero by 2025. And then we've got monitoring that's happening on an annual basis with 40 other farms. So really trying to build the community to provide confidence to farmers about what's possible, and then enable those farmers to have those conversations within their communities to be able to showcase the opportunities for farmers. So just to conclude, farmers and growers, their businesses are one of those businesses which is at the front line of the impact of climate change, as well as the opportunities that farmers have to deliver solutions. We know that soil carbon has benefits in terms of improving soil health, as well as business resilience, as well as those sort of wider climate impacts. There's lots to potentially measure. You know, there's potentially measuring lots of different things, and there's lots of innovation going on at the moment in terms of really trying to provide systems that work. But it's at a farm level, focus on what's going to give you that information that helps you make better management decisions, and really start to think about those wider benefits of improving soil health. You're never going to regret improving soil health because of those wider benefits that's going to come off it. And I think I'll shut up at that point.
That was fantastic, Becky. Really, really enthusiastic and passionate. And my word, you know, such a lot there. You make me, you caused me to regret my career a little bit, because I remember loving my soil science lectures when I was at Y College back in the 70s, but not following it through and going down the social science route. And every so often I think, God, I wish I'd gone into soils. It's such a fascinating area. Anyway, we've got a few minutes for some more questions. Peter, have you got 1 or 2 lined up?
Yes, it was mostly been comments rather than questions, but there's a question we should turn to for Becky from Siri Frost, just asking if the information that she's been talking about on soil carbons, whether this is being used to inform the development of environmental land management schemes. And specifically, Becky, are you individually getting involved in that process, and is your full farm carbon toolkit being used for that purpose?
Yes, we are on a couple of different options. We are involved in one looking at harmonisation of carbon footprinting tools for rollout in the next stage. We have also we've done a test and trial looking at the potential options for soil scanning technologies to help with that sort of baselining and ground truthing of current soil stocks. So yes, we are feeding in. We are very much involved in conversations. We're also supporting quite a lot of farmers that are currently within the Sustainable Farming Incentive Soils pilots with their information. So we are trying. We're only a small organisation, but I tend to try and shout quite loudly. So yeah, we try as much as possible.
And are you engaging with Northwick?
Absolutely. So Northwick have been a partner on the soil carbon project, the bit of the soil carbon project that was funded through Agritech Cornwall. Northwick have been involved with, but we also work quite closely with them and also the University of Plymouth as part of the analysis work.
And there's an interesting question here about clay content in soils. So in terms of soil carbon, is that a good or a bad thing? So what are the implications?
So I suppose the implications is that the amount of carbon that a soil can hold is linked to the clay content within that soil, because the carbon is bonded to the clay content. So for example, if you've got sandy soils, their ability to hold the same amount of carbon as a clay soil is very, very different. So we've got to understand the potential for carbon sequestration depending on the soil type. Now, down here in Devon, we're very lucky in the fact that we've got quite high content of clay within our soils. So our ability to hold on to carbon is very high. Our challenge in terms of managing those clay soils is the fact that we're high rainfall and those clay soils are often at risk of being damaged. So potentially, you know, carbon, we're already, certainly from our data from the Soil Carbon Project, our average soil organic carbon percentages are much higher than the national averages. But our challenge down here is maintaining those soils in a good structure so that actually that soil can be in good health. So it's got enough air in it that it can breathe and it can hold on to water and do all those other things as well. So again, if you look at the national benchmarks for soil organic matter, they want every field to be at 3%. Now, our average for Devon within our soil carbon project is our average is about 7.8%. So we're already well above average. But as I say, we have additional challenges in terms of maintaining structure and productive capacity of those soils and balancing that alongside protecting that carbon.
Great, and perhaps just one final quick question. Any thoughts about nitrogen oxide emissions from soils? Does it follow similar patterns to carbon?
Yes, absolutely. So nitrous oxide is something that nobody's really speaking about at the moment, but it's massively important, 298 times more potent in terms of its gas. Nitrous oxide, there's a couple of things in terms of management. So obviously nutrient management planning and looking at the amount of nitrogen that's going onto the farm, but also it does very much relate back to soil health in terms of the fact that if your soils are wet and compacted, then actually the denitrification process as part of that nitrogen cycle is much more likely to occur. So you're much more likely to get those losses as a result of nitrous oxide if your soil is not in good condition. And certainly at this time of year, that early spring application of nitrogen that might be going on, well, that will be going on in a lot of places, if our soils are cold and wet, that's one of those applications where there is a high risk of actually some of those losses disappearing. We're never going to totally eliminate nitrous oxide emissions from agriculture or from soils because it's part of that nitrogen cycle, and agriculture is a leaky system. But there's lots of things that we can do to improve nitrogen use efficiency and at the same time reduce our nitrous oxide emissions.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Becky.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's obviously provoked a tremendous amount of interest. Maybe we'll come back to some of those issues at the end when we have a few more minutes of questions. So we've got one more presentation. Just to say, the Devon Youth Parliament we were hoping to have at the end are unable to help us today, but we've got our final presentation now from Rosie Walker, Woodland Trust Devon, one of our LNP working group members. Again, I sing out great praise to the Woodland Trust and to Rosie and her colleagues for all the work that they do. I think I'm right in saying, Rosie might correct me, the Woodland Trust actually started in Devon. It was a sort of Dartington thing, wasn't it, back in the 70s or 80s? So, and of course is now one of the big players in the scene across the country. So over to you, Rosie.
How on earth do I follow Becky? Anyway, that was fab, Becky. Thank you so much. I'm going to talk to you all today about trees and the climate. I will just share my screen. Just 1 second. There we go. And there we are. So yeah, trees and the climate. So yeah, Michael is right. The Woodland Trust did start in Devon in 1972. So we're having our 50 years this year. And we have become one of the biggest national charities from very small beginnings. Down at Avon Valley Woods was our first woodland acquisition to save it from development. And there's so many threats to our woodland. The Woodland Trust is primarily concerned about the threats to our native woods and trees and our ancient woodland. That's woodland that's been under continuous cover since about 400 years on maps that we can find woodland on since then. So it's incredibly precious, irreplaceable habitat. But woodland is really being impacted quite seriously by climate change. Climate change is really stressing our native wildlife. It's changing the availability of resources like water and food. It's changing different natural cycles that shape our living environment. So phenology is showing that oak trees are coming into leaf and being available and having the caterpillars on at a different time to when the blue-tit chicks are being born, and just putting all different things into different places that are very linked together. Spring is a lot earlier than it used to be, more than a week earlier now than it used to be, but the different patterns and different speeds of that change, not everything is happening at 8.4 days earlier than it used to. So that's putting things into different balances. The climate is changing and making it a better place for a lot of our pests and invasive diseases. There's 43 species of tree in the UK, and all of them now have an associated pest or disease. So there's the oak processionary moth, there's ash dieback, there's all kinds of beetles that are attacking our native trees. If you looked at that 30 years ago, there were a lot less. There were trees that just did not have any, or native trees that didn't have any sort of pests that were going to give them the kind of shocks and threats that they're having now and putting them under threat. Dutch elm disease was sort of the first big one that everyone heard about, but now every single one of those 43 species has got some kind of pest or disease shown against it. And if you put if you do a graph of time and changing climate, those pests and diseases have just grown exponentially. There's some quite scary statistics around that. So that's one of the biggest impacts that climate change is already showing on our woodland. We know that this is happening because we've got massive declines in our woodland biodiversity. Many of our native species that we look at as our best friends really are associated with woodland. So hedgehogs, foxes are real beautiful animals and mammals that we really look after and really have a big feeling towards are actually many of them are woodland species that we see in our own gardens and come close to us, and they are really, really under threat. So we've had these massive declines in woodland butterflies, and also in woodland plants as well. So it's really showing what is changing around us. So woods and trees are really vital for a healthy, happy society. We really need them. They lock up carbon to fight climate change. They improve our health. There's the Japanese, I can never say this right, shiri something, have a Google, but there's tree bathing that the Japanese do. And going into woodlands is a really sort of life-affirming thing to do. So they really, really help and are part of who we are. They reduce pollution, flooding, support people, support livestock as well. So trees can really address both being a carbon store and can look at how we can address this decline in our wildlife. So our native woodlands can really do this by address the biodiversity crisis and the climate change crisis as well. By planting more trees, we'll be able to get more homes for nature, but we'll also be able to lock up more carbon. Average carbon stocks are about 37% higher in ancient woodland than the average for all of woodland together. And there's more research that's coming that's showing that actually mature ancient trees actually are, because of the actual size of them, are still sequestering more carbon than we've actually thought previously, because to maintain all of that leaf cover and to maintain the size of the canopy and to maintain those branches and keep it all together, they are actually having to absorb a lot of carbon to do that, even when they're a mature tree. So we're looking forward to new evidence that's going to show that trees are even more important to climate change than we thought. So we really need to do stuff about this now. We need to get planting, we need to let natural regeneration processes happen as well. And we really need to expand our woodland cover. The average woodland cover for the UK is about 13%. Devon's is about 11.8. So compared to the national average, isn't doing too badly. But we know that Devon has got all of those brilliant right conditions to be able to do more for trees than other parts of the country can. So it's all about the right trees in the right place, and it'd be brilliant for Devon to really increase its cover. Trees in urban developments, trees in urban places are really under threat from development. Trees in rural places are really under threat from development, and it's that fragmentation that can really, really cause a lot of the carbon to be lost from the soil within ancient woodland, which can be really important for climate change, as well as the actual trees as well. So we really need to support protecting and enhancing existing woods and trees as part of this, as well as doing the woodland creation, which is what a lot of the focus seems to be on at the moment. We need to update inventories, find out where all of these trees are. We are the holders of the ancient woodland inventory and also the ancient tree inventory, and we do not know where every ancient tree is in this country. And we might have the lowest cover, but we actually have more ancient trees than anywhere else in Europe, which is really important. And we need to understand where they are to ensure that we can protect them properly, that we can look at how we can manage livestock around them, because a lot of them are trees in the middle of fields that were once part of this ancient woodland canopy cover, but are now lone trees that are still standing, but are remnants of that ancient woodland. So we really need to ensure how we can look after those, and then how we can make sure that we can get ancient trees for the future as well. We need to do more monitoring and assessment. We've been doing this at our site at Fingal and really showing some great results about how, when you're restoring ancient woodland, when you bring back the native broadleaf trees, how quickly the biodiversity recovers. And we need to look at some of the we need to look at some of the gaps in the research as well. So we're looking at how we can bring agriculture and forestry together, and we're involved in some quite large trials in Devon to look at this, because historically the two industries have become very separate, and there's a lot that trees can actually do to support agriculture and to support soil quality as well, for agriculture, and negate the need for the extra fertilizer. You can actually use tree pulp and tree chippings as a really good mulch over crops, and you find you've got a really, really excellent soil. There's some really fantastic stuff that you could do there that is so much better for the environment than pumping more nitrogen in, which is really cool. So we've been told by the science that we need to plant a lot more trees, and we could actually convert some of our agricultural land to woodland to help combat some of these issues. We need to get to about 20% tree cover by 2050 if we're going to be able to meet any of this climate change issues, and do what we really need to do, and also to support biodiversity as well, and try and reduce some of that loss that we're seeing and that decline, and turn that around. We need to plant a lot more trees, so we need to plant about 10,000 a hectare by 2025. We're only doing about 1,400 hectares at the moment, so that's like nearly an 8-fold increase that we need to bring about. And the Trees Action Plan commits us to planting about 30,000 hectares a year from 2024. So we really need to start the change and get going on planting more trees. So please tell us about any sites that you know of that you think that we could do more with for trees. So we need to create networks, going back to what Harry said about the nature recovery network. We need to really bring woodlands together. We need to link them up. We need to put individual trees back into the landscape, and we need to restore the condition of existing woodland. So about 2.5% of the UK is covered in this ancient woodland, a really, really small amount. And between around 93% of it is not in favourable condition. So going back to what Harry said about us needing to restore and turn this problem around and the decline in biodiversity around, we really need to do this for ancient woodland as well. We need to bring it back into better management. We need to ensure that we leave dead wood lying around, because that really is getting the carbon cycle really properly going. And we're looking at some of the natural regeneration projects that we could do that could really start with just leaving a dead wood tree on the ground and letting nature take its course, get that tree, get all the detritivores in there, get all the beetles and all the invertebrate action going on in that tree, get the carbon properly locked back down into the soil, and seeing what can happen just from starting with a dead tree on the ground. Because we think that in places where there has been woodland before, and you can see that woodland flora in the sward, we might be able to get woodlands just to naturally regenerate, and kicking it off right at the beginning. It's the chicken and egg, and where do you start that cycle? We need to provide more means for locking up carbon, and deadwood is a real part of that. We really enjoy being tidy in the countryside, so we need to get some of those older processes back as well, and the woodland management back as well, so that we can provide all these havens for our wildlife and places where we can naturally store our carbon. So we can plant trees at all scales. We can start with one tree in our garden, or we could do a really big, large scale England Woodland Creation Offer grant, and a really large scale woodland creation. The Woodland Trust is working with all the landowners, partners, other NGOs, groups like the NFU, right across Devon and beyond, and bringing forestry and agriculture together and growing that forestry sector so that we've got a proper industry that can work with this as well. Trees don't have to stay just as trees. You need a woodland to have diversity in it. It needs to have people in it as well. We've lost those big predators that Harry alluded to as well. So we are the people that left to knock down the big trees, to open the light, to let that fauna and flora in and have spaces to thrive. And woodlands change. You know, we get a storm and it knocks down a couple of trees, it opens a space, and then new trees can come up and emerge and lock up more carbon. So we need to really get our processes going back in woodlands as well. We're also working on ways that we can unlock parcels of land and draw out actions and look at what we can actually do to take action to get going on this. Some of that is about opportunity mapping and giving communities the tools on the ground to be able to do this. So we offered community tree packs to get people really involved and to care about their trees and woodlands that are local to them. I don't know if any of you watched, there's a great rivers series on the BBC at the minute, and there was a lad in there talking about rivers, and the way that he was bringing about change was to get people to actually just care for the rivers. And it's the same for the woodland. We need to get people in there and using our woodlands and seeing what they actually mean to them, to get them to care, to stop all of this loss of woodland. 1,225 of our ancient woodlands are currently under threat from development at the moment. So as well as all of these external pressures and possible changes that can happen because of climate change, that they're under this just barrage of immediate threats that just could be chopped down because of some exceptional circumstance that isn't covered in the NPPF. So we need to, that's the National Planning Policy Framework, which is really the only protection there is for our ancient woodlands. And these are really the cathedrals of our landscape. So, and they don't have any protection at all, apart from that NPPF is just guidance. So we need to look at how we can bring in more protection for them as well. So this presentation was always, has gone around the houses a little bit at the Woodland Trust. So very much thank you for listening, and yeah, any questions?
Thank you very much indeed, Rosie. Lots and lots of issues there, and I've noticed quite a few questions coming up, and in fact I put one or two myself. So I'll call on Pete to get some more questions going. We've got about what have we got? About 15 minutes to have some more questions.
Okay, well, there are lots of questions coming in, so let's just sort of start picking those off. So lots of factual questions being asked and points of practical advice. So if we start with the factual stuff, Rosie, I don't know if there's anything you can say about statistics and numbers with trees. So, I mean, do we know how many trees there are in Devon? But perhaps more importantly, how many trees should we be aiming to plant per year? If we're going to meet the targets that you referred to there, what does that mean in terms of numbers or in terms of hectares per year? So what should we be aiming for?
I'm really sorry, I haven't got the hectareages for Devon. All I've got at the moment is the percentages of the cover. But it's those statistics were the national ones that I had. But we're going to have to really definitely increase the amount that we start planting. But I would go away and beaver away and find out what I can find out on those actual statistics for Devon.
Is it worth perhaps mentioning what we might be aiming for in the future to make clear what those targets should be? So in terms of proposals for a strategy, do you want to comment on that?
So yeah, so we are looking at doing some mapping to work some of those statistics out and putting this together in a strategy so that we know what we've got to achieve, and getting some more data behind all of that so that we can get some actions together and draw this together in a proper clear action plan with knowing where we are now, where we need to be, and how we can get there on a bit of a pathway, and drawing that together through a trees and wood strategy, which would be a really useful tool for us to be able to use to understand more about this.
Okay, and in terms of approaches to planting, have you got any advice that you can give on the species that should be used, particularly in the light of the real challenges we're facing from tree diseases, but also from squirrel damage to newly planted trees and young trees?
So there's several issues around there. We're obviously not planting any more ash, but we could, there are, but there is several species that are really good to use instead of ash. And it's about getting that diversity together, so using much more of a mix than just relying on one species. So including things like oak and hornbeam, lime, field maple, and looking for about getting the different sizes in the woodland as well that you're creating. So trees that will grow relatively quickly, like birch, you could include, and then you could mix them with the slow growing ones as well, so that you're really you're soaking up the carbon at different rates, and the different rates over time as those trees mature, because different species will soak up the carbon at different rates, so it's dependent on their age. And it's just getting the right trees in the right places and making sure that you're planting trees in places where it's really suitable and you're not damaging other habitats as well. You know, that calm grassland, and making sure that we're doing it in the right way.
So that point is picked up by a question from Rob Walton, who asks, how do we encourage planting on intensively managed grasslands rather than on those more marginal areas of land, which are the ones that tend to have the concentration of existing wildlife interest?
They do, and that's the big question, but that really comes down to the land prices and making sure that we've got enough land available to support that food security issue. So that's about the land use change and being willing to do that on the edges perhaps of those, so we ensure that we have got enough of that farmland, that's the prime farmland that we need for agriculture, but we need to just make sure that we are doing all this in the right places and it's the right mix, and we are ensuring that we've got enough resources for everything. On the lower grade agricultural land, we're often in conflict with the planners, because that's often where it's deemed that it's a really good site for a housing development or an employment opportunity. So we come into conflict on this wherever we are in terms of land use change, and it's about resolving those in the best pragmatic way that we can, and trying to ensure that we've got space for everyone to do what they need to do.
And whilst that theme of right place, right tree is really important, there's an interesting challenge here, just asking for comment on the potential role of non-natives. Could they be important in the future in ensuring that we have resilience to various tree diseases, but also in the light of the ongoing need for timber, and indeed for their role in sequestering carbon? So what place do they have?
Exactly, and there is a role for those species. We need to be very careful with importing trees. We've got our UK ISG standard, which is about native trees being grown and sourced, and even some of those ornamental trees being grown and sourced in the UK, so that you're not importing and bringing pests and diseases in, because it's often through the importing of the trees that the diseases do get into the country. That's exactly what happened with ash dieback. It came in from Denmark, even knowing that all the ash was really struggling in Denmark against ash dieback. We continued to import the trees and completely failed in having any form of sort of quarantine wall and keeping the disease out, when ash is actually really, really such a crucial, important species to our native woodland composition and native tree composition. So, but there is definitely a place for in the right places. There are places where it's completely, you know, it might be as part of the mix in that land use that it is timber production and it's different species and native species that want to be selected. But in an ideal world where with our native woodland being so under threat and our native species being so under threat, it would be great to see more of our native trees being used for the timber production and timber purposes and the timber industry.
Another topic it might be just worth turning to just very briefly. We've been talking a lot about the planting of new trees in a woodland context, but one of the questions just asks about the potential value of hedgerow trees, which are so important to our landscape and indeed our wildlife. What role do they have? What opportunity is that our hedges offer for contributing to our planting ambitions and targets for the future in Devon?
Hedges are definitely part of that offer, and as one of our offers to landowners, we have our More Hedges scheme, which is about linking existing woods and trees together and forming those linkages and connectivities in the landscape. And that's exactly what hedges do. And it's also about getting hedges managed correctly as well. So maybe leaving some hedges to do their own thing, to grow more outwards, and start some of that natural regeneration process in places as well. So hedges are really crucial in this. Devon is a landscape full of its hedgerows, and we just need to do more for hedgerows.
Just sort of perhaps a final question for you is a challenge we have about, are we going to have enough young trees available to plant in our nurseries? Does every community need a local tree nursery? Is that the answer?
It can be the answer. Because of the tree targets at the moment, we have seen and the tree planting and the woodland creation targets, we have seen shortages of trees, and it can be tricky to get hold of trees, particularly if you start looking for them later in the season. And the nurseries need a couple of years' notice to be able to get the trees going for what people need to be putting in the ground. So there has been shortages over this year. So yeah, community tree nurseries are a brilliant way for people to get involved as well. There are some fantastic projects going around the country. There's one called Our Barton, OUR Barton, being done by the National Trust actually, up in Gloucestershire, and they're getting people to collect trees, collect seeds and locally to them, and then bring them back to their gardens and grow them on, and making it Our Barton for them bringing the trees back together. And they've got a process for getting the quarantine and making sure that they're grown in the healthy soil. So they take the trees back off the people once they've got to a certain amount of size, then plant them on and put them in quarantine a bit before actually planting them out into the woodland. So there's some really clever, innovative stuff that can be happening with that.
And I mean, some of it isn't so clever. It's just kind of spotting some trees growing, isn't it? I mean, I'm a great fan of natural regeneration. I mean, I've got a corner where the hedge has birch in, and birch will just regenerate like mad. So I've got a corner of the field that's just full of birch. I dug up about 40 a couple of years ago and gave them to a local farmer who wanted to shield a new farm building. I mean, they've taken very well. So we need to be a bit more adventurous. Also, I mean, if we can find a way of getting farmers to manage their hedges differently, it would make a huge difference. Something Rob Wilson has been going on about for decades, and we still look out and see hedges that are cut down every blooming year. I mean, just letting a significant portion of those hedges grow up would be a huge step in the right direction, in my view, and that some of the natural regeneration that would come from that around the edges of fields. So there's a massive agenda here, isn't there? I can get on my hobby horse on hedges. I'm passionate about hedges, not quite as passionate as Rob Wilson, but that would be impossible. But it's a huge, huge issue. Look, I'm afraid time is coming to an end for this. And thank you very much to all our speakers and all our questioners and contributors. We will seek to digest some of this by looking at the chat and get the presentation circulated and all that sort of thing. I can't sum up you know, it's just too much. The only thing I would say by way of summary is, hey, could we bottle this enthusiasm? And, you know, if we could just send this enthusiasm to every parish in Devon, you know, half the battle would be done. But we have to remember, often when we gather like this, you know, we are the enthusiasts, and there's a lot of people out there who aren't, and there are some who could become so. And there was something in the chat about education, about community groups. I do think that's really, really important part of it. It is infusing people at a local level in schools and parish councils, etc., winning hearts and minds to do some of this stuff. And you know, and with the farming and landowning community, many of whom once they've grasped some of this, get really infused themselves. But you know, they have to make a living as well, and these are challenging times, as you know. So as I say, I won't burble on anymore. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions. Go out and plant. Well, it's too late to plant trees this year. I'll have to wait till the autumn now, but more tree planting, more decent management of culm grass. And I'm nearly as passionate about culm grass as I am hedges, really. Not much to choose between the two. Both wonderful. So thank you very much, everybody, and see you at the next webinar. And safe journeys if you're going anywhere, maybe even just from your office to the kitchen or the garden. All the best.